Hey guys, I want to talk today about the differences between me and George Floyd. We just had the anniversary of the day that George Floyd died, and I haven't done a video in a while. I was really sick for like 12 days, and I haven't showered in a really long time. So this is me. This is real. This is raw. But I want to talk about the importance of failure, of gross failure, and the transformative potential of failure for learning to make different choices. And I want to use George Floyd as an example, and a foil for that. So first, the things that George Floyd and I have in common. He had an addiction problem. I have an addiction problem. Um, we were both in trouble with the cops on more than one occasion. We were both held at gunpoint by cops on more than one occasion. We both made a whole bunch of really bad, stupid choices um, while we were in our addiction. Um, we both have things that are good about us. I read that George Floyd served meals to the elderly and um, was involved in some volunteer and some service work, which is laudable, and I have done those sorts of things as well. Um, and now I want to talk about the differences between George Floyd and me. Um, he had a really, really long rap sheet. He was imprisoned 9 times, I think. And a lot of those were drug-related charges. A lot of those were when he committed violent crimes against other people, including holding a pregnant woman hostage and pointing a gun at her belly. Um, I never did that. And this isn't to say, oh, Renee's perfect or Renee's better because she never did those things. No, we all have stuff that was horrible and that we did. I never did those things. Um, and so, it begins to diverge a little bit. So George Floyd's addiction seems to have been lifelong. George Floyd's interactions with law enforcement seems to have been lifelong. And you can make the argument that, oh, he was getting his life together. He was an upstanding member of the community. He was beloved by many people, family and friends, and people in his community. On the day of his death, he was using counterfeit money to try to buy cigarettes. On the day of his death, his body was full of fentanyl, which is a very powerful opioid. Lethal levels of fentanyl are at 3 nanograms per milliliter, ng per ml. 3. When they did George Floyd's autopsy, it revealed that he had 11 ng per ml in his body, almost 4 times the lethal limit of that drug in his body. Okay, maybe he had a relapse. I have also relapsed. I started my journey to sobriety in September of 2011, and I didn't get sober until June of 2012. It took a few tries because addiction is powerful and it's hard to stop doing what you've always done. I get that. Relapse is very common among people who are trying to live a life of recovery. So you can say he was just getting his life together. He was on his road to recovery. He had a relapse, but he had 4 times the lethal amount of an opioid in his body. It wasn't just that, he drank a couple of beers or he smoked a little bit of weed or something like that. Like 11 nanograms of fentanyl is a big, big deal. And it caused him to have behaviors that were crazy. The manager of the Cup Foods store discovered that he was using counterfeit money, and also that he was acting in a way that was very erratic and frightening enough that that manager needed to call 911. I get that. I have been in my addiction and done really, really crazy things that I shouldn't have been doing, behaving in ways that I shouldn't have been, saying things and interacting with people in ways that were aggressive, hostile, dangerous, and a general threat to the people around me. I get that. I've done that. Um, but I don't do that anymore. I found a road to sobriety and I did the hard work. I went to meetings every single day for years and years and years. I worked the steps. I changed. They say, when you go into recovery, the only thing you have to change is everything. And that's completely true because, and I want you to hear this, addiction is way more about the beliefs that you have about yourself and the behaviors then that arise out of those beliefs than it is about the frequency or quantity of consumption of your drug of choice. Um, the putting the substance in your body is a symptom of your beliefs about yourself. Alcoholism and addiction is a disease of thinking. It's a disease of the mind, and the putting the substance in your body is a symptom of that. So when you recover, you have to change everything about your life. Otherwise, you will continue to relapse. You will not be a recovered person. It's impossible. And that's why recovery has to be every day. And that sounds really daunting, and it is. So in the rooms of recovery, that's why they say it's one day at a time. It's just for today. Just worry about today, make good choices today. They say a lot, first thought wrong, because our defaults, the things that we have done for so long in our addiction, are the things that we're naturally going to return to. Addiction takes over your whole life. So your first thought is always wrong. So one of the things that they do for new people is to teach you that whatever your impulse is, whatever your instinct is, do the opposite of that, because your thinking is messed up from the beliefs that you have about yourself and then the substances that you put into your body to try to feel better about yourself or to try to block out the reality of the world going on around you. Alcoholics and addicts don't feel very good about themselves. That's why they use, that's why they abuse. So, okay, so you can say that George Floyd was just getting his life together, but he put a lot of drugs in his system. And he was acting very, very strangely and in a threatening manner. So the manager of the Cup Foods called 911. The police officers arrive. They go to George Floyd's car. George Floyd does not listen to what they are telling him to do. They say, put your hands on the steering wheel. He doesn't do it. Put your feet back in the car. He doesn't do it. Put your hands on your head. He doesn't do it. You can hear in the full footage of, George Floyd's last 31 minutes, you can hear a passenger in George Floyd's vehicle begging him to stop resisting. This person that he was riding along with was reasonable and realized you shouldn't resist. When cops are asking you to do something, you should do it. And this is another one of the differences between George Floyd and me that I want to talk about. There was an incident in, I don't know, sometime in the fall, November of 2011, I think, where one of my friends dialed 911 because they knew that I was contemplating suicide. Again, I was having feelings about myself and beliefs about myself that were causing me to act in ways that were dangerous, erratic, and frightening. And one of my friends called 911. Officers came to the restaurant where I was sitting very quietly and writing in my journal. I hadn't been causing any problems in the restaurant that day. These officers approached me and they said, "We need you to leave with us right now." And I said, "But I'm not doing anything." And they said, "Well, but we know from your friend that you're having some emotional issues and we want to talk to you about that outside." And I said, "But I'm not doing anything. You don't have a right to remove me from this restaurant. I'm not causing a scene. I'm not bothering anybody. I'm not being loud. I'm not being disorderly. I'm not being distracting." Well, the cops won that round, okay? And they said, "You can either walk out of here under your own will, or we can cuff you and drag you out." And so I chose at that moment to listen, and I walked out of the restaurant with them. Now, they put me in the back of the squad car and they took me to a mental facility. I didn't want to be there. They wanted me to take a breathalyzer test, and I knew that I had only had one beer and that I was not over the legal limit, and so I refused to blow. And they kept saying, "No, you need to do this. You need to take this breathalyzer." And I refused, and I refused. And they applied increasing coercion for me to comply with them, and I didn't. And so I went to reach for the handle of a door because I was done and I was going to walk past them. And to them, that appeared as an aggressive move on my part, and they thought I was reaching for a weapon. What happened in that moment? They deployed a taser on me. They slammed me into a wall and then they dragged me down a hallway on my face. Was it excessive force? Maybe, but they were doing their jobs. I was acting in a way that was erratic, dangerous, and threatening, and they needed to subdue me because I was refusing to listen to them. It didn't matter that I was right. And when I blew, it was like a .03. Our state limit here is .08. So I was right. I wasn't over the legal limit. I was not intoxicated. But that didn't matter because in that moment, they were asking me to do things. They were doing their job and I didn't comply. So that excessive force was my consequence. So they arrested me on charges of public intox, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. They put me in 2 sets of handcuffs. Right here, me and George Floyd were buddies. I didn't listen, and I got consequences. I got force. Because that is what officers of the law are supposed to do when people are acting in a way that is dangerous, erratic, and threatening. I didn't like it. It sure as hell didn't feel good. And they were doing their jobs. So I got taken to jail. And since I was, considered suicidal or whatever, they stripped me naked and I was still in these 2 sets of handcuffs and they put this blanket around me. And the Velcro was worn out, and so it kept falling down. And so the guys in the drunk tank got a really great show, and there was all this hooting and hollering. And my booking was really horrible. It was a very demoralizing experience for me, start to finish. My parents bailed me out. We move on. So in that instance, I was like George Floyd. I thought, I'm right. I shouldn't, what have I done? I shouldn't have to listen to you. You guys just leave me alone. Don't do me like that. Don't do me like that. The same things that George Floyd was saying to the officers who were apprehending him after he had used counterfeit money at that Cup Foods store. Okay, next thing. The passenger in George Floyd's car is a very reasonable person and says, "Hey man, stop resisting, stop resisting." They knew, they had some smarts and some reasonability, and they were trying to urge him to cooperate, because that is the right thing to do when you are apprehended by police who are doing their job. It's illegal in my state to commit suicide. I think it's kind of a weird law, but there you have it. That's the law. It's illegal to pass counterfeit money. You can't do that. These cops had every right to be there and to apprehend George Floyd. If he had cooperated, they wouldn't have needed to continue to use force. So they take down his name and his birth date. They're saying, we're going to put you in the squad car, and he is complaining about how he's claustrophobic, and they're like, just get in the car, just get in the car, all you have to do is sit down, just take a seat. And he's like, I'm claustrophobic. Okay, maybe he was, maybe that's legit. However, we have a lot of footage of George Floyd's vehicle and the squad car that the Minnesota police officers were trying to put him in. George Floyd's vehicle was smaller than the SUV squad car that the cops were trying to put him in. There's no reason to have been claustrophobic in a space that is bigger than the one that you yourself were driving. So that's not a legitimate claim. I mean, if you just look at it reasonably and rationally, his vehicle was smaller than the police officer's vehicle. So don't talk to me about being claustrophobic. Get in. All you have to do is get in. And then, he doesn't get in, and he doesn't get in, and he lays down in the back seat and kicks one of the officers. All they want him to do is take a seat. They are not being excessively rude or violent. They are responding in kind to the behavior that George Floyd was demonstrating at that time. He asks to be put on the ground. Can I just be put on the ground? Can I just be put on the ground? Just let me lay on the ground. So they do that. And then where everybody kind of gets all in a tizzy, the mainstream media promotes this video that appears to show one of the officers' knees on George Floyd's neck. Now, it just so happens that there is another video from a different angle of these same events. Derek Chauvin's knee was never on George Floyd's neck. It was behind him, between his shoulder blades, and then eventually it moved down to his lower back. But that video was suppressed, and almost nobody saw it, because the mainstream media had already decided in this moment that George Floyd was the victim of police brutality on a racially predicated imaginary cause, and they wanted those police officers to be convicted, because this is what the mainstream media does. They have a narrative that they are already bought into, and everything has to fit with that. So the video that they promoted and that went viral and got shared hundreds of millions of times or whatever, doesn't accurately show what happened. You can see what appears to happen with the knee on the neck, but this other video shows that that clearly is not where the knee was. Another thing, and facts are really important here. Everybody was shouting, and outraged because George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. If you watch the full footage, he started complaining about having difficulty breathing 7 minutes before he was ever on the ground with a knee on his back. Okay? So there was no pressure on his neck. There was no pressure on his lungs. No one was choking him. But 7 minutes before he was on the ground with a knee, he had already been complaining for that entire 7 minutes about feeling like he was having difficulty breathing. I don't know a lot about lethal doses of an opioid, of fentanyl. Maybe one of the side effects is it makes you feel panicked and like you're having difficulty breathing. But as Floyd keeps complaining about that, one of the officers even points out, well, it seems like you've got plenty of breath to be yelling at us, which is a really good observation. If he was really having trouble breathing, he wouldn't have been able to yell at them so long and to keep resisting and kicking them and fighting them and screaming and crying out. It doesn't appear that he was actually having trouble breathing. It was a line that he was using. He was trying to play the victim, just like he was trying to play the victim by claiming to be claustrophobic in a space that was bigger than the space of his own driver's seat in his own vehicle. So those kinds of things are important. George Floyd continued to resist. He wasn't compliant. He wasn't listening. He wasn't cooperating. Those were his choices. The officers kept saying, just cooperate, just do what we say, and if he would have listened at any point in that 25 minutes, it would have been a different story. They could have picked him up, set him in the cop car, and gone to the police station, and he would still be alive today. So, I want to jump away from that for just a minute. The next time I was held at gunpoint was January of 2020. I had been fired from a job, and the associate who I was supposed to turn over all of the accounts to had said, please turn over all of these accounts. I know they're all in your name with your password and stuff. If you can give me all of these accounts, then we will give you your 2 weeks vacation payout or whatever. And so I said, that's going to take some time. And he said, that's fine, no problem. And it took me about 3 hours because there was a lot of accounts. I was a director of marketing, and we had tons of social channels, and media accounts that were all under my name because that was my job. So I said, it's going to take me a while. And he said, okay, that's fine. So I start trying to figure out how do I anonymize these accounts? How do I get these accounts out of my name? There were 2 of them that were tied to my own personal social accounts. They were business accounts that originated from my own socials. And I read a bunch of knowledge base articles and help articles to try to figure out how to do that. And there were 2 of them that it legitimately was not possible. You can't transfer ownership of those accounts without the new person having access to admin control of the personal base account. I couldn't do it. I tried. And he got really mad at me and lost his temper, went into his office, slammed his door, and I didn't know this at that time, but he was calling 911. I walked out of my office and around the back to another office because I wanted to say goodbye to a couple of my former coworkers. He called 911, and he was so angry, he was so out of control, he told them that I was postal and refusing to leave. They sent a SWAT team after me. So I'm around in the back. They can't find me. They assume I'm hiding. When I walk out of the back office on my own power, there are 4 brutes with enormous weapons drawn, pointed at me. I said, what is going on here? And they immediately start yelling at me and treating me like I'm this dangerous criminal. Now, from my previous encounter with law enforcement, I know that even if I'm right, you don't resist. So I put my hands up. I put my hands on the back of my head. I walked forward. I did everything that they asked. I walked into my office. They treated me terribly because they had information from the 911 call. That was all they had to go on. Were they right? No, absolutely not. But I wasn't in a position at that moment to explain to them, you are not correct about what you think is happening here. Um, I think they really wanted a confrontation because once they realized that I was smiling politely, I was fully compliant with everything that they were asking me to do, I think they were a little disappointed. They had gotten all excited because there's some big, postal showdown about to happen. But here is this 135-pound girl that any of them could easily have taken, and she's cooperating with everything we're asking. And so they tried to goad me. Um, they pushed me, they teased me, they taunted me, they really, really wanted me to engage so that they would have an excuse to use force. And I didn't give them that. I listened immediately and completely to everything that they said. I didn't resist. I wasn't snarky. I wasn't sarcastic. I didn't try to give an excuse or state my case. I just did what I was told. And I walked out of there. From a SWAT team. I could have ended up dead or seriously injured or at least arrested and in jail, but I didn't. I walked out. Why? Because I made choices in those moments, even though I wasn't in the wrong, even though my coworker had made up this insane bullshit because of his own lack of control. I did what I knew I was supposed to do when you are having an interaction with law enforcement. And I walked away, and that was that. There weren't any additional consequences to that. George Floyd continued to kick, continued to thrash around, continued to not shut up. So those officers in Minnesota continued to have to employ force in order to restrain this man who had engaged in illegal activity and was resisting arrest. It's tragic that he died. It's horrible. That's very, very sad. Nobody is arguing that. But George Floyd made choices in those moments, in his last moments, that contributed to his death. If he had listened, if he had cooperated, even if he, thought that he was innocent, or thought that he was going to be claustrophobic in the back of the squad car, or thought that, the police shouldn't be bothering him, if he had just done what they had asked, he would be alive today. And this is where failure is a huge impetus for learning and for changing behavior. I was in the same position, the same kind of position as George Floyd. I had a lot of force deployed on me in November of 2011 because I was doing things that warranted police use of force. That experience impacted me. I didn't like it. I didn't want that to ever happen again. Was it my fault that this SWAT team was called on me at my place of employment? No. Did they need to be there? No. Was I right? Yes. If I had tried to explain to them, you guys are not in the right, put your guns down, don't be doing me like this, blah, blah, blah. If I had resisted, they would have had justification to continue to escalate the amount of force that they needed to employ in order to subdue me. They didn't know that I wasn't a threat because they had information from a phone call. They have to go on what they're given, okay? That's what law enforcement has to do. That's all the information that they have. So the officers who were restraining George Floyd are talking amongst themselves as they're trying to subdue him, saying, he had a weed pipe or a crack pipe in his pocket, and they're trying to discuss, what is it? Is it PCP that makes you like foam at the mouth and act all crazy? Because again, when they were walking him across the street, 7 minutes before they even had him on the ground and were employing the force, he was already foaming at the mouth. The drugs were doing things to George Floyd's body, but he had chosen to put that stuff in his body at lethal levels. I learned from my mistake, from my choices, from my addiction. Every time I post on social media about how can George Floyd be anybody's hero, how can you swallow this narrative that his name is synonymous with justice and that somehow he was the tragic victim of this systemically racist police force throughout America, where every police officer is unduly targeting Black men. How can you believe that when you actually watch the video and know the fact? The answer is you can't. George Floyd isn't a hero. His name is not synonymous with justice. George Floyd was a career thug with a history of violence, with an addiction that he was not actively addressing, and he died. And that's sad, because I'm proof that there is a solution. You don't have to continue the cycle of negative beliefs about yourself, behaviors that are erratic, dangerous, and threatening to others arising out of those beliefs, and continuing to be involved in police encounters and continuing to put substances in your body that cause you to act in those ways. You don't have to do it. It's really hard. Addiction is hard to address and to overcome, and you have to commit to it every day. But it's possible. I'm proof. You can do it. Anyone can do it. Anyone. We see this all the time in the rooms of recovery. Anyone can recover from addiction. All it takes is changing everything, one day at a time. So every time I'm posting on social media about how this narrative that George Floyd is somehow a hero and that he was the victim of a systemically racist institution and we need to defund the police, blah, 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 a lot of people think it's really neat to try to shame me for my own addiction. Renee, you had trouble with addiction too. Shouldn't you be a little more compassionate? How dare you not have compassion? George Floyd was a volunteer and he was involved in like social outreach and he was getting his life together. How dare you say that his whatever. They try to make it about me and about my addiction. They pull my skeleton out of the closet. Which is fine. I'm really comfortable talking about it. Yeah, I screwed up. I did some crazy, crazy shit. I had encounters with police officers. I had consequences. They were the naturally occurring consequences of the behavior that I was engaging with at that time, and I learned from those experiences. I made different choices. I didn't want those consequences anymore because they sucked. They were horrible. I don't like being tased. I don't like being in handcuffs. I don't like being in jail. I don't like feeling like shit about myself and having to numb out and create an alternate reality for myself based on some kind of mind-altering substance. I don't like that. I would rather live in the real world where I can largely choose what kind of life I have because I'm making choices based on reason, logic, and feeling good about myself and wanting to take care of myself and wanting to take care of the people around me. That's the difference between me and George Floyd. George Floyd never got to that point, okay? And it's sad. He could have, because recovery is available. There is a solution. It's an easy solution. It's a simple solution. It's not easy, but it is simple. You stop doing all of the things that you've ever done. Your first thought is wrong. You learn how to make different choices from the ones that you normally default to. one day at a time, every day, all day, until you develop new responses to external stimuli. You can do it. Anyone can do it. I did it. I do it. It's how I maintain my sobriety. It's how I have a life today that I could never have imagined, that I'm completely content with, profoundly grateful for, and wouldn't change. I don't want to go back to putting substances in my body. I don't want to go back to engaging in dangerous, erratic, and threatening behaviors, because that stuff doesn't get me the kinds of results, the kinds of consequences that I want for my life. I experienced that stuff. It was horrible. If you've experienced stuff like that too, you know how horrible it is, and it just promulgates that cycle, and it's really hard to get out of, and it's possible. George Floyd and I were similar in many, many ways. I made different choices, and it was hard, and it took a really long time, and I did it. So, there you have it. If you want to share your story with me, share your comments, share your feedback. What do you think about this? Does this help you see the situation with George Floyd a little more clearly, a little more fact-based, a little more real, instead of just this overwhelming woke narrative that says, oh my God, he was a victim of racial injustice and undue targeting by the police? No. That's just not true. There are facts and evidence in abundance to the contrary. All you have to do is be willing to see them and admit that they make a difference. You can change your life too. You can. It's not easy. It is possible. And I hope that for you. If you don't know where to start, please hit me up. Email me, renee@resourcefulpeacock.com. Respond in the comments on this video. Get in touch with me. I would love to be a resource for you. If this is something that you struggle with, if you have somebody else who's struggling, if you don't know where to turn, I can point you in some directions. I can come alongside you and say, I get it. I understand. It hurts, and I feel for you, and there is a solution. You can do this. You can learn from your past and create a different future. You can. God bless you. Thank you for watching.